The yellow sun shone down Main Street perfectly for about 1 hour every day. Every morning, Trinian plotted her routes, kept to the shadows and away from the open. It was necessary to do this an hour before sunrise, as throughout the day the street configurations often changed. A dumpster moved a meter down, a beverage booth shifted to the right enough that yesterday's route no longer obscured a vital blind spot. Every angle was carefully assessed for those blind spots, as well as obscuration points, backtrack routes, flanking routes, and other exploitable configurations. Any environmental element that could be used as a distraction, misdirection, or camouflage was carefully examined. Satisfied that her routes were good, Trinian tucked herself between an information booth and a garbage bin, squatted, and let out a thin sigh. The steam of her breath momentarily enveloped her head and dissipated quickly while a pump in the distance engaged on its 20-minute mark, echoing through the deserted streets. Located at the edge of the market ring, a multimedia service announcement piped up right on schedule, telling an empty square that they'd be open in 30 minutes. A second pump was activated much closer, followed by metal curtains rolling up at the Free Galleria, a marketplace where anyone could set up a sales booth and sell their wares. No licensing was needed, no rental fees, no reserved spots. It opened at 0830 hours. Trinian's cabled and bunched hair was tied back with a strip of ripped gray fabric and tucked under her jacket. The girl deliberately did not clean herself, as her face and hair, the two brightest parts of her, were dirty in just the right spots to act as camouflage. Trinian sighed again, but a little more heavily, her breath again enveloping her head in the cool morning air. The cloud hung for a couple extra seconds. The information booth beside her beeped a middle C and displayed an image of the richest area in Krakenkurt on its splash screen, while text sparkled soundfully into existence over the top, and a deep human voice announced, "Welcome to Krakenkurt, where adventure lives. Tap my screen for information about our many remarkable attractions." The welcome message and sparkling intro repeated every minute. After removing her brown fingerless gloves and tucking them into her jacket, the urchin fished out an energy bar she had lifted from a local vending machine, an old model that was easily exploited for free food. It tasted like sugar, with a hint of nuts and a substance called taggin that was all the rage for all candy and energy bars. Trinian found that no one could explain what taggin really was. Tearing open the silverine wrapping, she took 3 big bites, and the bar disappeared. Silverine was a common packaging material for prepared foods that often had a silver sheen to the polymer surface. Trinian rolled up the packaging and tucked it over the edge and into the garbage bin beside her. Drool ran down the corner of her mouth as she struggled to chew. The girl found a small stone and tossed it forward. Where it settled appeared to be the perfect place to establish the furthest range for any target that gave her the best chance of success. Tossing another stone much closer established the closest range that was just far enough that she had room to operate when she sprung. The information booth was also a deliberate choice. It was often successful when used as a natural distraction. Trinian looked up at the yellow electronic ticker tape display ahead at a skywalk level that scrolled the time and temperature every 10 seconds. 0837. It was already 10 degrees Celsius. Creatures were beginning to drift in sporadically. Usually the first to rise were the Alphar, followed by the humanoids and orcoids, and the infernoids sleeping in until noon when the sun was hottest. Of course, there were outliers, like the early rising infernoid or the late Alphar wandering into work at 1300 hours. It turned out that she was one of the outliers, but one with a specific purpose. She whispered the story of the tiger and the crane to herself, a story told to her by her father. In the reeds of the pond, a crane suns itself. From the tree line emerges a ferocious tiger, eager to make a meal of the crane. The tiger attacks. The crane leaps in the air, landing beside the tiger and leaving a scratch above one eye. The tiger becomes enraged and attacks the crane more aggressively. Again, the crane leaps in the air, landing behind the tiger. Again, the tiger is scratched, this time across the top of its head. Again and again, the tiger attacks the crane, and every time the tiger becomes just a little more hurt and a little more tired. Eventually, the tiger wanders back into the forest and finds a meal elsewhere. Her father had explained. The tiger rushes in, advertising its intent immediately and relentlessly expending a lot of energy. The crane waits until the right moment. When the crane strikes, it is sudden and effective. The girl recited the story to herself, partly to remember her father, partly to send a prayer to whatever gods would hear it, and partly in mental preparation for work. More creatures had gathered by the time the ticker read 0857. Several storefronts rolled open, metal barriers slamming into their storage pockets, and a number of kiosks turned on their signs, some neon, some holographic, all very colorful. Looking back behind her, Trinian watched for a few seconds as a thin piece of sky between the buildings in the distance grew noticeably brighter. Soon, the entire street would be lit from the direction of her intended escape route, giving her a perfectly lit area to survey for the hit and any pursuers a blinding view of the morning sun in its full glory, cloaking Trinian's escape with whatever prize she managed to quickly snatch and run off with. The girl had several other locations further down Main Street and was usually able to pull off 3 or 4 hits in the hour that she had the sun on her side. However, once it slid behind the old brewery stacks, her workday was over, and it was time to head back to the hollowed-out hab module she called home that week. It was all about half sleeping, finding an uncomfortable place that would keep you just conscious enough to respond to threats. Only occasionally would she be able to fully sleep, as most places available to her were very insecure. When 0900 hit, the expected explosion of light was nearly blinding to the growing multitude, except Trinian, who had chosen one of the few spots that were perfectly shielded. The information booth on her left guarded the glare off the modular warehouse, and the garbage bin on the right from the direct reflection off of a particular glass pane across the street 3 stories up. The difference between the bright sunlight and the patch of shade gave her the perfect cloaking effect. Whoever stood right between the rocks would never see the hit coming. With her eyesight adjusted, she watched the street fill up. Alfar, humans, dwarves, and some alien races were gathering in large numbers already. 3 hoverbikes sped towards the sunrise, trying to get to their destinations before the streets filled up too much. Trinian watched for her first target of the day as she swallowed the barely swallowable clump of energy bar and repositioned her feet for the first grab of the day. 3 Alfars with some expensive jewelry browsed into view. However, arcane restrictions aside, Alfar would break that law to stop a little thief. That was a no-go, almost as if they were begging her to try. Looking on, there was another promising victim a few minutes later. I can outrun him easily, she thought. He was wearing shades and dressed in earth tones. That killed her first advantage, yet his careless handling of that backpack was juicy. One good running yank and it would be hers, and it was laden with something solid. The human entered the zone, and just before striking she noticed a pistol tucked in his belt line. The weapon peeked through just as he reached to touch the information kiosk. Trinian's eyes widened and she backed off instantly. She was fast, but even she couldn't outrun a gun. She waited for about 10 more minutes before the next promising target hove into view. Several meters down, in a crowd of several pairs of pointy ears, were a man and a woman, both humans. A young couple that felt they'd explore the beautiful city of Krakenkurt, she thought. Red was an older woman with shoulder-length red hair, dressed in mostly grays, blacks, and browns, and sporting a pair of gold goggles worn on her forehead. She found the baubles at the Tinsley's booth, adorable enough that she started tugging at his hand. Her smile was joyful, and she puppy-looked into his eyes. He, a dark, short-haired, medium-build man wearing a gray light linen shirt and blue cargo jeans. He pulled back momentarily before relenting and bringing out his crystal tablet from the cargo pocket. He put his back to Trinian and made a motion she guessed was swiping credits to Red's device. Ready player 1, 1 life left, and behind on the leaderboard. Urchin 1337 prepares to act. To Trinian, it had to be a game. If she was doing this for real, the young girl would assuredly lose her nerve, and that meant a death sentence by starvation. She had to do this, so Trinian became a crane in a meadow, a player in a first-person shooting hologram, or anything other than what she really was, a lonely child doing her best not to die. Trinian was as alone as one could get. She knew a handful of people and they were purely business contacts. The girl had no friends, and that was by choice. On the street, friends were an advantage with a serious defect. They tended to screw you at the worst time. It was to be expected. One did what they had to do to stay alive, often things they would never have done while still a benefit to the massive economic engine of the galaxy. One could ask, where do the homeless and the disadvantaged of the outer colonies fit into the Empire? The answer was simple. They didn't. They were the supervisors that stuck their neck out for the wrong person, the managers that fired the wrong person, the technicians that caused a supervisor or manager to rethink a plan, and the laborers with worn-out bodies and worn-out care factor. No matter where they came from, they were the blacklisted beings. What was the blacklist? It wasn't an actual list. It was a place you ended up at, like a Plinko chip after slamming into bureaucratic red tape after corporate stonewall on your way down to the bottom, where you stayed because the gravity of the situation was that there was no way you were going back up. That was unnatural. The Blacklist didn't really care what station you were in when it all went for shit for you. The Blacklist only cared that you were there. If you were on it, you couldn't get work, you didn't get services, and you couldn't get an education. If you had one, it didn't matter either because you were on the Blacklist. Silently, the girl rose to the balls of her feet. The trapdoor spider awaits her prey's approach. She braces herself ready to strike. While the woman turned to the vendor with her own tablet and began selecting an item that appeared to be a necklace, the man advanced down the street toward Trinian. He did not put his tablet away, but held it in his hand, like one would a book or a folder. Slowly he closed in on the stone that Trinian determined marked the far edge of her striking range. Yet this was still too far. The man had to get closer, and then he had to be in one of two optimal positions for her grab to work. He had to either be facing the garbage bin or the information board, with the information board being the best option of the two because of Trinian's right-handedness. She was not yet proficient with the left-handed grab, so she let him take a few steps toward the closest stone. The information booth performed right on cue. Predictably, the man stopped and tapped the screen to examine the information displayed. The urchin darted out and, in one fluid motion, tipped the forward edge of his tablet with her left index finger, toppling it backwards out of his loose grip and into her waiting hand. Following through with her motion, she ran around the back of the man and toward the sunrise, immediately sprinting. Two audio-video ads sounded at the same time and created an extra confusing element in the man's brain. He became momentarily confused and tried to catch the falling tablet, thinking it had just lost his grip on it. In less than half a second, he became suddenly, crudely, and rudely aware of the reality. Hey! Hey! Shielding his eyes, he peered towards the sun but could not see anything more than a dark, small figure disappear into the glare. A glare that was further obscured by a growing crowd that caused random flashing effects as creatures crossed this way and that between him and the thief. The man pursued Trinian. "Rebecca! Code Black!" He yelled back quickly and bolted after his tablet. When the girl rounded a planned turn, she quickly looked back. This was a test to see if her pursuer was giving chase, a way of looking without unnecessarily slowing down. As she turned the corner, Trinian saw that the man was indeed giving chase. The cross street she turned onto was in complete shadow, and that meant that the man would be able to see much better. The girl deliberately ran down the middle, gauging how long it would take him to turn a corner himself. At the right moment, Trinian veered right to draw the man's attention to the right and the next intersection. When the unopened kiosks were between them, she turned left at the intersection. The man reached the same location and turned right. He expected to see a figure running down the street, not quite reaching the next intersection. He did not. "Damn it, you sneaky!" Suddenly, he turned around and sprinted in the other direction. The instant glare blinded him momentarily. It hurt, and he swore a curse as he faltered momentarily in his headlong charge. The urchin looked back on her next turn right and noticed the man still following her but slowing down and shielding his eyes. She smirked as, right after her turn, she ducked between two red-blue hab module stacks of 3. Trinian accidentally kicked a drink can that was not there in her morning check. The clatter was muffled by a steam discharge from the street behind her. The way was narrow, and barely allowed room for her to run at full speed. If the man heard the can and got there, he would have to run semi-sideways, thus slowing down to continue pursuit. Trinian then got to the end after a few twists and turns, where a light blue Hab Modules 3 stack provided a dead end. This was what was referred to as a dead-end escape. It was a dead end for whatever was chasing you, as long as the thing chasing you was larger than you were. There were perhaps a few precious centimeters between the dead-end stack and the one to her right. Quickly, she took a breath and let it out as she squeezed through toward the other side. 3/4 of the way through, the girl started to feel the agony of the lack of air. A final push, and she popped out the other side. She breathed heavily and looked back through the gap. The man yelled back at her from the other side. "Oh, come on, kid, I'll pay you for it!" He pleaded with an outstretched hand, but it was in vain, and he knew it. The look on his face was that of a man who was about to lose something major. This only encouraged the thief. Trinian tucked the tablet in her jacket and zipped it up. Smirking, she blew him a kiss, and, as an afterthought, snarling, she decided to give him the middle finger before running back the way she came. The waif heard the man call her several unsavory things before she was out of earshot. It was possible she even heard a death threat mixed in there. The girl followed a secondary route to a fence she knew would crack the tablet and hit up the accounts before the man could find a communications center to report the theft, locking those accounts. As the morning sun warmed the city, so did the other dormant smells as food vendors fired up their kitchens. The cooking of noodles, dumplings, and several varieties of worm seed was the most dominant of them, originating at the Don Conga kiosk down the alley. Several minutes of navigating through a quickly gathering street mob found her at a heavy iron door in the short alley. The door itself seemed impenetrable, even unbreakable. However, the walls that it was bolted to were less beefy by a wide margin. It sat proudly tucked between a blue gutted apartment stack and a pink pleasure module. A neon sign above the pleasure module hatch flashed Buffy's very pinkly as it buzzed lightly in the morning sun. Trinian turned and kicked backward at the iron door a number of times with the heel of her boot, producing a sharp clack sound. The heels, as well as the toes and foot pads, were all reinforced with strong carbon material. When she heard a faint voice on the other side, she yelled back, "I got a hot one." There was a distant sliding of metal against metal, ending in a solid thunk. The iron door squeaked open and a thin, bald head poked out from around the back of the door. Pointed ears straddled the creature's head, and the flesh seemed slightly rubbery looking. The two parallel rows of short horns ran from the forehead to the nape of the neck. The skinny humanoid threw open the door the rest of the way to let Trinian inside, closing it and sliding the heavy iron bar back in place after she was through. The smell of burned metal reached her nostrils. The urchin immediately heard the familiar hum of a fusion power unit echo through the enclosure. The habitat module was gutted at one point and repurposed a number of times before settling into its current form as a fencing hub. To the right, there were 5 metal frame shelf units that were evenly spaced perpendicular to the wall. The entire section to the door was behind a chain-link cage, secured with a heavy lock and chain wrapped several times around heavy cast-iron poles. The smaller window in the lockup cage was covered with a series of scrap metal barriers that equated to a similar mismatch in strength with the surrounding structure as the main door. On the shelves were various items so hot that the burn would be handed down by the Corps' highest judicial authority. These were items that were banned on some uncivilized worlds, items that had magical components. To the left end was a workshop, and it was toward this that the creature went. He spoke with a drawl. "Man, I gotta say, this is a record for you. It's not 30 of 9. Let me see what you got." He smiled, revealing rows of tiny, sharp teeth and gum disease. From her jacket's inner pocket, Trinian pulled out the crystal tablet. "The guy I got this from transferred credits just before I got it." She handed it to the creature. Taking the item from the girl, the creature turned on one of many crudely constructed instruments in the small workshop. "I'll give you 100 creds for the tablet and standard 50 on all the accounts I break. Actually, Stan, I'll be keeping the tablet. Time to upgrade my operation." She winked. Trinian's real intent was to find information that would net much more income than pickpocketing and scams. Some of her tactics simply wouldn't work anymore. 2, the man was more upset than expected, given the fact that anyone's tablet data was backed up on some server in the Corps. This guy was one of those upworldly assholes. He probably just banged the hot redhead he was with, so get on with it, you might only have minutes. Stan slipped the tablet into a 30cm square pad. "Alrighty then, let's see." A 35 square centimeter holographic screen popped up above the pad. Currently, the screen was blank, glowing a transparent dark blue with a trio of bright blue dots throbbing in the middle. In a moment, text began scrolling up for a few seconds, too fast for a normal eye to see. The tablet display throbbed into being as a beautiful blue monochrome, and Stan concentrated on infiltrating what he discovered was an infiltration device. "Damn, this is high-level shit. These guys are major operators. I'm seeing applications designed to infiltrate Android CPUs and rewrite code live." He grunted, tried a few things, and grunted again. After a bunch of grunting and eventual swearing, he looked back at Trinian and winked. At that moment, the screen displayed an extremely long file list. Each file's encoded differently, so it will be a little tedious to hack into each one. Now, I could do it for you, but it'll cost you. "Hack the accounts already?" Concern started to sound in Trinian's voice. This may have been the big break she was looking for. "Relax. You should check your burner account," he advised as he handed her tablet back. "It's unlocked. Now, I couldn't blank the serials, so don't get caught by authorities with it." Trinian smiled joyfully as she looked at her crystal bank account. "I love you, Stan. This is awesome." Her jaw dropped perceptibly as she noticed the number. So many zeros! Just over 1 million credits worth of zeros sat in her account. I sure hope it helps you with that dream of yours. The creature sounded serious. The accounts I hacked were corporate accounts. Some of those files have high-level locks on them. Personally, I would dump it and forget about it. But I know you, and I know your ambitions. You're smart as fuck, but you better be damn careful with this one. Your overconfidence in your complex planning is going to be your undoing. The girl's smile phase transitioned to concern. She placed her hand on his shoulder. Hey, you know me. I get up a couple hours earlier than anyone else, just so I'm a step ahead of everyone else. Trinian winked at him, lightly punching his shoulder. Stan nodded, unconvinced. I wish you the best shit, Squirt. Then he slid the bar away to open the door. Smiling, Trin said, One way or another, I always bounce back. Have a good shit, Stan. Trinian stepped through the door and hurried in the opposite direction of the starport. The starport would be one of the first places the man would be scoping for her. With the take she got on the hit, she would be expected to book passage off the planet. Who, in her position, wouldn't want to get the hell off of that planet with that kind of money at her disposal? Alarmingly, the man could have resources. Trinians were limited to Stan and a couple other fences. The girl tucked herself in a doorway of an abandoned tool shop, long looted for anything useful, and took out her account card. Quickly, she moved the credits from the burner account onto the card itself. It was a very risky move. If the card was lost or damaged enough, the money would be gone, as it would be if it fell into other hands. The more Trinian thought about it, the more scary it looked. For the prior 5 years, Trinian stayed alive because she was extremely careful. What she was doing right then was not in any way careful. However, it was necessary to wipe out the money trail. By keeping the money in her account, it was safe. The moment she started spending from it, the transactions would be recorded and thus traceable by anyone who knew how to track money movements. By putting the money on the card, that money became untraceable, as payments went directly from the card to the target rather than accessing an account as a payable medium. After shoving the card into the palm of her glove where she hand-sewn a pocket that would secure such things, she scanned the street before stepping out of the doorway. Approximately 30 creatures, mostly humans with an insectoid alien standing out from the rest, were going about their business as the day picked up. Creatures were on their way to browse kiosks and shops. She unzipped her jacket most of the way down as the day was already starting to heat up to plus 15, and it was already after 10. According to information ticker halfway down the street, she lost the rest of her hour, but the payoff was well worth it. Just as the urchin was about to step out into the open, the man appeared down the block to her left. A steam vent discharged somewhere behind him, silhouetting him momentarily, checking her motion and pulling back. Trinian watched as her pulse started to thump out a typical theatrical danger beat. The man would stop at each passerby and shopkeeper and converse with them frantically before moving on to the next. The bark of a large dog echoed among the general cacophony of the street. An Alfar girl on a hoverbike weaved by at moderate speed. Trinian swore under her breath. She was nowhere near her standard routes. If she bolted now, he would see her, and with no plan, there was a chance of her dead-ending herself. As the man got near, the girl could hear his words clearly enough. She's this tall, human, gray clothing, dark jacket, literally dirty blonde. He repeated the descriptors as if in a running, random loop. However, Trinian had to do something fast, as it was the only seconds before he was upon her. She felt behind her for a doorknob or handle. There was nothing but a hole. Sticking 3 of her fingers in the hole, she pulled the door down, hoping it wouldn't give away the squeak of a hinge. She often avoided creaking hinges with this technique, but it had its risks. Luckily, it did not make a sound, but the man was nearly upon her, and she could not close the door quietly. Trinian faded into the shop's dim interior and hid behind the door with a shelf unit behind her before the man appeared in the doorway. Trinian could hear him panting heavily and whispering colorful words. Then he was quiet, except for his breathing, which the girl could hear getting closer. The man was investigating the open door and was advancing inside the shop. The girl eased out the knife she had as her heart pounded in a heavy metal drum solo in her chest. As a second thought, Trinian also put the tablet and the account card under a shelf filled with empty, ripped boxes and silverine packages of various sizes. She shoved them under the shelf just as the man appeared in front of her. Treasure hunt. Post-recovery. Trinian had spent another 3 days in comfortable recovery, and little expense was spared to make her feel as comfortable as possible. Fresh bedding every day, holographic entertainment, and 3 actual meals a day. In context, a meal in this case was some bland biomash, orange juice, and jelly. She never got to speak directly with Dr. Killion again, interacting with bedside assistants and robot nurses with a Y during her stay. The term nurse differentiated robot assistants in hospitals that administered basic general care from their biological nurse counterparts that performed more complicated procedures that were too mundane for the doctors, and AI, doctors with an E. Doctors were fully sentient android professional medical practitioners that were less popular with more conservative-minded patients and were also responsible for the title differentiation. On her discharge day, Trin was given a hypodermic shot by a robot nurse. When the girl's eyes slowly opened again, she saw only a dark blur. After blinking a few times, an android's face was staring at her. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Right, I almost forgot," she thought. Realizing what had happened, she found that she was getting sick of society's plethora of sleazebags, sleazebag types, obvious sleazebags, hidden sleazebags, and most of all, sleazebags who knew they were sleazebags and were proud of it. Sleazebags like Killian, who said all the right things to get her to agree to what she still felt was servitude, were among the top of Trin's never-to-trust list. As smooth as his denials were, she didn't believe him. Street instinct kicked in when she met him and never abated. The inside walls were of the same material as other hab modules in Crankenkurt's downtown slum, dark blue with light gray trim in the center as well as the corners and edges. There was a door across from her on the other side of Bixby. One window sat to the left, partially blocked by a plastic shipping pallet that let in just enough light around the edges for Trinian to see. Outside sounded like a typical shopping crowd near the next ring outward, the current working people ring. The hum of hoverbikes slowly picking their way through the throngs of creatures and general noise from the outside vibrated the walls of the module, amplifying the effect. The android, an older dark model with orange LED eyes, cordially introduced himself. "I am Bixby. I was ordered to guard you until you awoke and to advise you that you and I are to remain in core space so that we may be contacted. You are free to pursue anything of immediate personal concern before you receive our first mission." Bixby continued, "You are in an abandoned storage lot in Carlito Thoroughfare, between Riley Road and East 10th Street. Dr. Killian portaled us to this module to ensure your safety." Trinian replied sarcastically, "I've just been dumped in a fucking hab module, so maybe the safety was more for Killian than yours truly." She got to her feet and felt the side of her head when her fingers met stubble. Her hair had been growing back since she woke after the operation, but 2 very fresh scabs figured prominently. She looked into Bixby's android eyes. "So, how long did you watch over me?" "Assuming you would like me to round up, 34 hours, Miss Serenity." The android, though still squatting, looked directly up at Trinian. "Wow, that's the longest sleep I've had that didn't involve drinking some bum's piss water homebrew and wondering why I'm all gooey down below," she commented in jest. "I'm Trinity, literally anything else but Miss Trinity. I'm not Miss anything," she dismissed. "I'm just me." The girl pulled her hood over her head. Her gloves were missing. The android stepped to the door and swung open a small bolt he had quickly fashioned a day earlier to keep the door secured. Carlito Thoroughfare was revealed in the open frame. Trinian had some practice in Killion's facility using her implant, but this was the first time she was in her own element. The girl thought her instructions: analyze the street configuration and overlay a route to Degra Street Market. A route in the form of a blue ribbon appeared in the girl's vision on the other side of the door, heading down Carlito Thoroughfare. Time: 1927, Thursday, IPA 14. From Trinian's perspective, she just suddenly remembered the information as if it all fed directly into working memory. Bixby had opened the door and stepped out. It was time to move. Trinian exited immediately, followed the route line, weaving around other creatures. All Bixby could do was hurry after her and say, "Excuse me, Trin, what is your destination?" Turning to the android, the girl backwalked as she raised her voice over the chaotic background of Carlito. Let's just say that a girl needs little assurance in the form of monetary independence. Just follow me, keep your LEDs peeled and your Vox centers disengaged. Trinian turned and quickened her pace. Studying her behavior, the android found that the girl was extremely aware of crowd dynamics. She appeared to be able to track the movements of every creature visible and kept a constant high rate of speed by timing her movements and plotting her course as many as 15 moves ahead of time, with several creatures crossing her path either just before or just behind her. The little human had built a skill that even androids had difficulty mastering. Given their high natural ability to muscle through calculations, one would think that androids would have had crowd dynamics licked at the outset. Apparently, it was found that there was a factor that androids called super decision factor that added true randomness to the math. Randomness that resolved into infinities, and no matter how self-aware the android was, they were not able to calculate on infinity. It took several minutes of traveling in this manner before Trinian quickly veered to the right and turned onto the Dagger Street Market. Bixby had lost sight of the little human, and by the time he rounded the same corner, she was nowhere to be seen. He advanced in the same direction she was last seen heading, eventually passing in front of the entrance to an old abandoned tool shop. A hoverbike sped past, taking advantage of a gap in the creatures. "Bix, in here," Trinian announced. She sounded disappointed. "It's not here." Dragging the toe of her boot on the pool of dried blood, she tried remembering. "I guess this is where I got shot?" Bixby corrected. "That is not your blood, Trinian." "What are you looking for?" Patience was the hallmark of androids. They didn't get frustrated, angry, possessive, or any other emotion that normally led to impatience. Trinian was too busy with racing thoughts to answer Bixby's query right away. Implant. Enhanced visual. Several seconds passed as she investigated the area. "That's a lot of blood. Then I guess I stabbed him?" She checked and realized her knife was gone. "If this isn't my blood, then I was shot somewhere else." The girl looked around and stepped toward the door. More blood. Only these showed movement out the door. Implant. Target the blood. Enhance. And live update, she thought. The blood on the ground seemed to glow red, showing a definite path out the door and to the right. She started following the trail, nearly bumping into 3 orc teens. Bixby was close behind, which seemed to discourage any teasing or bullying from the orcs as Trinian rabbit-holed her investigation of the blood. For half a module, Trinian followed the trail that ended in a pool of dried blood, but no body. "They must have removed it," she said. Her stress was starting to be obvious to Bixby. "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my account card that I hid, which is no longer where I hid it and might be... Wait." She looked back and noticed a number of extra pools of blood near a small garbage receptacle. The girl ran to the location, looked around the garbage bin, and found the corner of a crystal card peeking mischievously out from under the can. She grabbed it quickly. That was close. He must have found my card, been in a stumbling run, ran into someone here, and dropped my card. With a sigh of relief, she attempted to access the card. It glitched and flickered, but did not access the account status like it was supposed to. Upon close inspection, there was a hairline crack in the crystal. She cried out in frustration. "Fuck! I just can't win!" A number of humanoids, the teen orcs, and a pair of insectoid aliens paused to look. Having finally identified why his partner was acting in a seemingly illogical manner, the android offered a solution. Someone with the right knowledge could access the data on an account card in order to deposit the funds into a core authorized bank, where the money will be safe. We can locate someone who would do this. Trinian felt that anyone else involved would just take a huge chunk of the money. She tapped the card unconsciously against her chin as she thought. Implant. Feed all practical knowledge on crystal account card engineering. Her mistake was instantly obvious to her as she barely managed to blurt out, "Beep!" before a massive headache hit, forcing her to close her eyes and scream. One of the teen orcs yelled at the android. "I didn't do nothing!" He gestured to his friends. "They saw I did nothing!" The shortest of them chimed in support, as one would expect, confirming they indeed did nothing. With remarkable speed, Bixby stepped in and held Trinian in his arms as he knelt on one knee. He looked at the orcs. "No one has yet blamed your party for any violations. You may proceed unmolested." Remarkably, it was quite ineffective. As the 3 orcs started moving on their way, the biggest orc reminded the android, "You shouldn't blame people for things they didn't do. That makes you an asshole." Bixby sounded sincerely confused, replying after the group, "But no one blamed..." The orcs were then out of earshot. Bixby let the situation go, chalking it up to another strange encounter with biologicals. White-hot agony, in every way unimaginable, filled Trinian's consciousness for what seemed like an eternity. When it subsided, her head throbbed, and each throb felt like her head was going to explode. The pain was so intense that tears welled up in her eyes. "Implant, please, it hurts!" The implant did nothing to ease the pain. The android watched the area while Trinian went through whatever it was that she did to herself. "I must inform you of how impressive it is that you are managing what must be unimaginable pain, but more importantly, you are bleeding from your incisions. I would not recommend performing the same action again until you have completely healed from your..." The last thing she heard was a loud, wet, orcoid belch down the street, followed by fading laughter. When Trinian went limp, it forced Bigsby to secure the account card before it fell from her grasp at the same time he caught her in one arm. The android correctly surmised that there was a serious problem with the little human. Seeing that the red fluid they called blood was leaking from healing incisions, it seemed like an opportune moment to get off the street. Onlookers paused, contracted only fucking kid syndrome, and moved on. It was not that many creatures in history had been accused of helping a starving brat and stepped in to help one, but it was a social status issue. You didn't have to abuse or help one of those things. They are a problem that takes care of themselves. They just left it alone, and nature would take its course. Like the girl was his infant, Bigsby carried her back the short distance to the tool shop, where he laid her in a soft pile of rubble near the door, which he closed and secured. Dr. Killion had cautioned the android about the possibility of using certain features and the number of side effects to expect with treatments. The android was well armed with knowledge to help him work with the little human. However, this particular condition was not part of that knowledge. It took some seconds to access the core network to find treatments. With the fuzzy logic choice made, the android reached over and gently placed 2 fingers on Trinian's neck to monitor her pulse. Bigsby kept his fingers in position, building a graph and history of the girl's heartbeat cycles. Without knowing anything about human construction, he could at least determine if Trinian was getting better or worse based on the changes in the strength or frequency of her heart rate. After a couple of minutes, he was certain that she was at least stable and decided to take no more actions until the situation changed. Bigsby spent the rest of that evening, that night, and the next morning monitoring Trinian and guarding her at the same time. There was some commotion outside as the morning sun started brightening, but no one came to the shop door. By mid-morning, the normal day crowd was in full swing. Trinian let out a groan just after her pulse was starting to normalize. Bigsby removed his fingers from the girl's neck, confident that she would soon be conscious. Standing up, he proceeded to open the door to the shop and find fuel for her. It was perhaps 20 minutes after he left that Trinian came to fully, tired but with her head not pounding. There was a very powerful reluctance to use the implant at that point. The girl had no additional technical knowledge to reward her for all the pain, and, as it happened, the crystal card was gone. After a moment, it was realized that Bigsby was also absent. Trinian sighed in resignation as she gingerly touched her head. Dried blood covered one side after nearly a whole day of off and on bleeding. There was nothing wet, though, no fresh leakage. Out loud, Trinian mumbled, "I'm so fucking hungry." Before getting to her feet and looking through the hole in the door of the module, she thought, it must be getting close to noon. Where's the android? Surely he didn't put me in here and fuck off, not after watching over me for 30 or so hours. She decided to wait. There was no reason to suspect that her partner, stuck in the same arrangement as herself, would glitch out and bugger off for no reason. That was stuff that artificial assistants did, not androids that professed self-awareness. The girl never had a negative experience with an android. It was biologicals, humans, Alpha, Orcoid, that were the real problem. When she was younger, she often watched holographic programs that were hosted and acted by androids. Of course, the networks were forbidden from having their android actors depict biologicals. That was a regulatory no-no. The android was gone for nearly an hour, but when he returned, Trinian was sitting up with her elbows on her knees, looking tired, and Bigsby thought the loss of blood may have had something to do with it. She needed to eat the right fortified foods, and that was something the android could easily find solutions for. Holding out a silverine carrying bag in one hand and her card in the other, Bigsby said, "I am pleased to see that you are better. There is a highly nutritious biological fluid in the bag that will help replace your lost blood, and I secured your card for you to keep it safe." Trinian smiled lightly and took both items, indicating that he sit down and join her, which he did by sitting in the exact same manner as she. The girl tore open a package that contained some kind of biomedical mush that tasted quite good. It seems to me that you kept more than my cards safe twice in a row. I appreciate that a lot. In his normal, matter-of-fact manner, he tried to explain. I did what any other sentient entity would do in a similar situation. He knew that reality did not reflect his words, and he, if anyone, knew all about neglect, devaluing, and deliberate exploitation. That last one they shared together. Leaning against his metal frame and resting her head on his shoulder, the girl countered. No other sentient entity did. She acknowledged that he was a person to her, mostly because he treated her like she mattered. She thought of him as if he mattered. You did. I've been on the street for a few years, and no one does what you did. Never. Out here, it's all about yourself. It has to be. Thank you for taking care of me. Bixby turned his head and looked into her eyes, but said nothing. For an android, the meaning was crudely understood, but the feeling itself was absent. Much about the human condition, indeed biological condition, was alien and extremely difficult to navigate in the best of times. Bixby realized early in his sentience that he did not have to understand emotion, a pitfall his fellow sentient androids normally fell into. All he needed was to know what each emotion represented at a given moment. E equals mc squared was an equation that Bixby formulated to calculate a given human emotion state. E stood for emotion, M was for motivation, and C was the square of the context. Perhaps it was as difficult for biological beings to understand the android's thinking process as it was for the android to understand emotions. The android gestured. Also, in the bag are cleaning wipes. It would be wise to avoid displaying your blood. I understand that biologicals have a reaction called fear when seeing copious amounts of that particular fluid, dried or not. After a moment, the android inquired, Do you know how to access your card? Trinian chuckled and tore open a package of wipes with one swipe. She explained while cleaning up the scary red stuff that she nearly killed herself to get the kind of money someone like her was never meant to have. She thought, I need to be realistic, and then said, I didn't retain anything, and there's no one on this planet with those kinds of connections. Even Stan is just a software jockey who sells second-hand tech. I am sorry to hear that. However, I may have another solution. It will simply take a bit longer. When Trinian gave him a get-on-with-it glare, he explained the details. Yours is a legally acquired card issued by a core financial institution, in this case, Argosia Financial. I have determined that the data on the card is intact, and if we can get to the Argosia Homeworld financial offices, we may be able to get them to recover the data to a new card or to an account of your choice. However, Argosia is over 800 light-years from Kraken, and it will take time to traverse to the nearest transfer gate to jump directly there. In the meantime, credits will be safe but inaccessible as long as the card sustains no further damage. That information caused Trinian's hope to make a resurgence, and after some consideration, the cyborg handed Bixby the account card. Got a place to keep it safe? There was a long pause before the android answered. I do have small compartments throughout my frame where I can store such items safely. However, though I do not share them, I understand the importance of biological's attachment to credits. I must ask you to be absolutely certain that you trust me for this task. The girl poked the android with the card. I don't want to take any chances. This is my retirement fund. I can't lose it. Retirement? Are you daft, kid? You're not even 13 yet. Trinian thought to herself. She shoved the card at him again. Very well. He took the card and inserted it into a slot just below the right chest plate. There was an audible servo mechanism that activated momentarily, pulling it in. I shall not betray your trust. I will keep your retirement fund safe for as long as you need. Thanks. You're actually pretty decent. People suck, thought Trinian, but this, Bixby doesn't. 3 days watching over a brat. That's got to account for something. Of the biologicals he had encountered, Bixby felt less like an ornament, a status symbol, a tool, or a means to an end, and more like a living person with Trinian. The swearing, however, was, for some reason, incalculable. It followed no definitive patterns in linguistic structure, yet was capable of being every part of normal conversation between biologicals. Bixby needed more research in that area, so he started with experimentation. Thank you. So are you, when you aren't fucking swearing. When Trinian laughed lightly, the android felt he was onto something. The laugh was recorded for analysis at a later time after he had enough samples to find the patterns. Escape. Memory. The man glared at her, panting heavily, sweat beading his face in the mid-morning heat. With hands on knees, he blew a lock of dark hair out of his green eyes and looked at the girl with a look that she knew too well. Now, about that blown kiss. The man turned to close the shop door but was interrupted by a sharp impact against his throat. Once the man took his eyes off Trinian, her right hand flashed out and stuck the man in the throat. It sank easily but suddenly stopped. Blood flowed over her knife, which she let go of, with only enough time to grab one thing, the tablet or the card. The urchin's hand met the tablet and Trinian darted past. The man's breathing was labored. He grabbed his throat and her jacket, fumbling and forcing Trinian to swiftly nail him in the nutsack. He let go, and as he knelt over, she bolted past and out the door. Once outside, she turned right and sprinted down the street. Fuck, she thought in complete panic. Trinian ran no more than 15 paces when, out from behind a small kiosk, stepped the red-haired woman wearing the gold goggles over her eyes, pointing what looked like a gun at Trinian. The girl's heart reached a drum solo as she instinctively began to run when the woman fired. Red missed the urchin, who saw the flash of blue light fly past her head. Trinian completed her turn as she was about to run back the way she came to dodge between kiosks. The man barred her escape. He was holding his throat with the knife still in it, his legs vibrating and unable to keep himself steady. A trail of blood was following him from the tool shop. However, the shot that the woman fired also inadvertently caused the man to dodge and drop the account card, which hit the pavement and skittered under the garbage receptacle. It wedged itself between the round stand and the bottom of the can. The girl watched as the man caught himself on the receptacle and collapsed. Trinian was shocked. She knew that she had killed a person, and surrendering was not going to get her mercy. The girl braced to run past the man. Aiming more carefully, the woman sneered, "Nighty-night." The trigger was pulled, and less than a second later, the left side of the girl's head dissipated in a cloud of red and an audible thud. Rebecca scooped up the tablet from a rapidly growing pool of blood on her way to Cranston. She knelt beside him and gingerly touched the knife. "No, don't remove it," she thought. She tapped the side of her goggles to plot the fastest route back to the Reinhardt. A ticker line showed the way virtually through the goggles. Cranston. He did not respond, and his color was already faded. Quickly, the woman grabbed a hypo from the vest pocket and injected herself in the arm. Her clothes were suddenly just a little tighter, and she felt a lot more alert and aggressive. She threw the hypo into the garbage beside her and carefully hefted Cranston into a fireman's carry position, making sure to keep his wound above heart level to reduce blood loss. Rebecca nearly sprinted out of Decker Street, following the route her goggles displayed. It took no more than 14 minutes to get back to the ship. Cranston was not going to the hospital because she knew they would pronounce him deceased on arrival. Instead, Rebecca took him to a medical alcove unit on the Reinhardt to heal his wounds and hopefully resuscitate him. It was a simple indentation tucked into a corner module between the crew berths and the storage and utility bay. In the hexagonal alcove, there was a tissue reconstruction unit, a chemical and biological lab station, and a number of other small components related to medical and healing. To the right was an examination pod, 3 meters long and containing Cranston behind a round glass barrier. The wound was cleared and was being patched by a pair of skin extruders that laid new stem cells bred for rapid growth. Unfortunately, any spinal cord damage the autodoc wouldn't be able to mend due to the higher complexity. Rebecca had placed him in stasis in desperation. After a moment to absorb what had happened, she started to shake slowly, coming off her stimulant boost. There were 3 left before she had to make more. Remembering that she had the tablet connected to the business accounts, the recovery agent checked in to make sure all was okay. The tablet was unlocked. No. Panic was unavoidable, and quickly she accessed the accounts. Rebecca swore she saw the balance of minus 6.72 credits. The negative values were the late fees for Reinhardt's mortgage payment. In less than an hour, the woman lost the tablet, the rest of her year's budget, possibly her ship if she couldn't smooth over the default with the bank, her parents' retirement home, and maybe her beloved Cranston. Rebecca looked at him, now colored up a bit but still not conscious. Bigsby and Trinian had managed to beg, steal, and scam enough credits to stay at one of the motels in the commercial ring. One quite successful scam was where Bixby would hold up a limp and seemingly unconscious Trinian, pleading for credits to get her to a medical facility and that she was his owner's child and she was in grave danger. She did not smell, was clean, and clearly belonged to an adult. Definitely no one contracted just a fucking kid syndrome that day. When it came to accommodations, a triple S motel was still a step up from the street. Barely. The room was small, able to fit a king-size bed, a dresser, and a fold-out chair. The walls were thin wood, crudely framed in to create a few smaller rooms out of one large module. So thin were the walls that Trinian could hear one other tenant vigorously exercising. The cyborg tried to ignore what she never wanted to be her business under any circumstances. The original bedding was pulled off to the side and allowed to bunch on the floor while Trinian slept in her jacket with her hood up. There was no way she was going to use those sheets, as Triple S specifically stood for sleazy, slimy, and smelly. Trinian took a few moments to recover her senses. Outside, ads blasted, and assistants assisted. She mused that it was so strange that dreams rarely accessed true memories. Which was strange because the dream that the girl wakened from was not a dream. Just like before, the dream was a recovered memory. The one where she could say with near complete certainty who it was that killed her. The red-haired woman from the theft. Her hand flew to her mouth the moment she fully realized that she had killed a person. She wrestled her guilt into a corner by insisting that she had no other choice. Surely he was going to have his way, right? The girl justified. At least he was gonna beat me to death. Guilt was a powerful adversary, and she knew there was little hope of permanently keeping it at bay. Bixby was gone again. They had been roughing it for a couple days trying to locate a specialist that would recode the money on the damaged card onto a new card. One fencing agent explained why they would never find a real banking expert in the colonies. Look, kid, it's like this. The technology in those cards are so far ahead of us here that we can barely manage to hack into accounts on mobile devices. You're talking about hardware coding and recoding using the exact same quantum mechanical cipher in the particle states of the crystal. That's a whole other level shit right there. That's core world specialization. Okay, she was not going to get that card coded anytime soon. Having been reluctant to fire up her implant for a couple days, the cyborg finally decided it was time to try again. There was definitely no progress without it. Implant, activate. The last activation was 2 days, 2 hours, and 24 minutes ago. All systems are operating within expected standards, came the reply, directly into her head. Time check. 10:26 Galactic Standard. Shit, she said. Trinian hated sleeping in, as it often meant that she missed her entire day. She became accustomed to the same routine every morning for years. Her old life persisted after her death. What is the status of the implant integration? Trinian had to see how much more damned sleep she needed. The implant neural integration process is now 87% complete, the implant replied. The healing cranial incisions is advancing more quickly. How many more hours of sleep? 12.3. That was 2 more nights. She also had that much time left to settle her affairs. Unfortunately, that worked out quite badly until last night's dream. Truthfully, Trinian did not stop to consider that Red could have been the one who shot her. Considering that the man was a hacker operative of some kind, it just stood to reason that Red was a part of that dynamic and had the capability and opportunity to take the shot that ended Trinian. Stop, she thought. She did not want to hear that part. Implant, search all core media for any data on Red. Searching Red. Real name, Rebecca Haley Faust. Nickname, Reb. Age, 35. Race, human. Profession, Android recovery specialist. Owner-operator of Faust Recovery Services. Major asset, frigate model ASY-700S. FSS Reinhardt. The implant replied. Trinian was quite surprised. That is just too much of a coincidence. Both Red and Killian were on opposite ends of one of the biggest social issues to come about in the 24th century. Android sentience versus Android ownership. Search for information on any current partners of Rebecca Faust. Searching. Cranston Patrick Devos, born 2452, Alclal 2, to Marjorie and Victor Devos on Argosa 4. Dropped out of the education system to make money to help support his family along with his mother and father. 13 dropped charges for alleged threats to co-workers on several jobs he had between the ages of 20 and 23, hired by Faust Recovery Services in 2485. Cranston became a silent partner on Dre 4, 2487. Not especially useful, thought Trinian, except that he has a known temper. A thought occurred to her. Implant, how long has Faust Recovery Services been operating on and around Kraken? 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days. They've been here since before Dad and I? Implant, search for Dr. Killion and any variation of the first and last names connected to criminal charges, arrests, warrants, or any legal actions against Dr. Killion regarding android liberation. Searching. Dr. Beauregard, Nathaniel, Cragwall, Deathcry, Killion, Ph.D., born, Lilt, 14, 2412, on Deadgrom. Has a doctorate in emergency medicine, a doctorate in cybernetics, a doctorate in applicable science, and a doctorate in physics, chemistry, and biology, specializing in the biology of humans, infernoids, and orcoids. Charged on IPA 10 for the charge of liberation of unowned property, but no warrant or arrest or detention has been issued. Implant, how long has Dr. Killian been around the Kraken region? 7 years, 6 months, and 4 days. She sat, mentally frozen for a few seconds. Killian and Red have operated here at the same time for the last 6 years, she thought. Trinian felt it would be difficult to believe that they had never encountered each other in all that time, especially since they occupied opposite ends of a moral spectrum in their very professions, and if they had encountered each other, it would not have been under the most ideal circumstances. They must have known each other and probably clashed on a regular basis. If they clashed regularly, then some of those clashes may be on record somewhere. Implant, spider search, using backdoors as necessary. Any reports of interactions between Rebecca Faust and Dr. Killian, priority on or within a month of Deirdre 14, 2481. If at any point the words shitload of data were appropriate, that very moment was one of them. Trinian was inundated, but as requested, the first occurrence revealed a flood of reports of a pistol shootout in the spaceport between two groups of entities. The report explained that a number of individuals were involved in a violent altercation on the tarmac of Dock Group 4, Berth 10, on Deirdre 14, 2481. One fatality was reported. Charges were laid and fines were levied against the two fighting factions, Faust Recovery Services and Killian Kane Associates. That was the day Dad didn't return. Bullseye if I ever saw one. Oh, Daddy, what happened to you? She was certain now that Killian didn't just stumble on her. A perfect place at a perfect time aspect of the doctor's story no longer sat well with the girl. She suspected that he'd been observing her from a distance for some time. Bixby stepped into view and nearly startled her. It is nice to see you awake. I've endeavored to canvass the spaceport for the identity of Red, the man she was with, or their whereabouts. I detoured to the Primary Hospital Infirmary Services Center and inquired about any patients that may have been admitted with lacerations, but the only candidate was a poor man who somehow fell on his bong in such a manner that it broke and shoved a large chunk of glass into his throat. It is safe to conclude that the man was never taken to a proper facility. I would have put the highest probability in a private residence or on a starship. I also regret to inform you that I haven't had time to get you breakfast. She refused to tell the android that she was hungry and was trying hard to ignore it in order to get to work. It has been well established that humans' mental capacity declines in states of extreme hunger, Bixby challenged playfully. Trinian smirked. You're saying that I'm literally stupid for not eating? It took a moment, a deliberate and on-purpose moment. Yes. Okay, listen, I've been busy myself doing a bit of poking around. Trinian shared her discoveries from that morning. Faust, Killian, and my dad walked onto a tarmac 5 years ago with two possible outcomes. Dad dead, Dad alive. I know that he didn't die, so he was alive. Dad would never have abandoned me, so he was prevented from coming home. Who prevented him? Killian or Faust? Bixby recalled the day the girl was shot, and he assisted Killian in carrying Trinian's body through the portal to the lab, where she was to be repaired. The doctor never mentioned anything about the child's father, the incident at the spaceport, or any links to Rebecca Faust prior to Trinian's fatal encounter. Having been ordered by Killian on an ownership level not to tell Trinian what he knew about the incident, Bixby kept silent but started a process to find a way around the order. Trinian said, Killian knew of me 5 fucking years ago. He's been watching me all that time. How many times did he try to get Faust and I to clash? She thought. That tablet was not a chance encounter. The android wanted to fill in the blanks in her speculations, but had been restricted from doing so on a command level. In the reeds of a pond, a crane suns itself. Bixby recited Train's crane story. When he heard the girl recite the tale, he was so intrigued by the simplicity of the message that he kept a copy. Trin locked her gaze on Bix. "You were there?" the girl accused, then shimmied off the foot of her bed, her lips in a near sneer. She threw the door all the way to the side, which clacked loudly when it hit the stop, and she paused without looking back and said, "That's totally uncool." She sped-walked indiscriminately, with several thoughts, all competing for a rage moment but none winning a clear victory. They resolved to take turns in a queue, each using a few seconds at a time. When the storm finally subsided, and logic felt it was safe enough to emerge, Trin knew that the real issue wasn't that Bixby didn't tell her what happened, but that he probably couldn't. Deep down, she found that she trusted Bixby and that it was Killian that she couldn't trust, which brought up concerns she kept buried. The girl stopped at the usual hangout point overlooking Center Plaza and leaned backward. She unconsciously and uncharacteristically picked her fingernails clean, something she had not done for years. Bixby followed, but at a fair distance so as not to interfere with Trinian and still be there for her if the need arose. It was clear that the girl had figured out the scenario and his own restricted involvement. He did not attempt to calculate Trinian's anger. Many other androids started out by trying to understand the problem first, which invariably failed outright. Whereas Bixby's strategy was to simply accept the situation for what it was, assign a scalar value for the severity, and calculate future actions accordingly. They got stuck in loops, but Bixby at least made a good decision once in a while. Though this was not one of those times, the few successes were still incalculably more than most other androids had achieved. After an hour of following the girl, he finally received a message while pretending to browse an information board. "Meet me. I'm easy to find, seeing that you've been following me for the last hour." He could see her leaning backward against the rusted yellow rail overlooking the Center Plaza concourse below. The day was in full swing, and it neared noon in Krakenkurt. Hoverbikes were restricted from all upper and lower plaza areas, but that did not stop a couple self-entitled riders from cruising through to save 5 minutes. Bixby leaned up against the rail, mimicking Trinian. "I am very sorry for," she interrupted. "No, I am. Obviously Killian controls you too." The android stood straight. "Dr. Killian is legally my owner. If I was able to break those instructions, I would have been able to act." Bixby lowered his gaze. "I could only watch while a creature lost its life." It was difficult for the AI to qualify or identify what he was experiencing. "I am prevented from informing you of the events of that day and the intentions of Dr. Killian. I can only provide hints in the form of facts about irrelevant aspects and hope that you are able to decipher the truth. It was the only way I could direct you to what you needed to know." The girl thought of an example. "So you couldn't tell me that you were there, but you could recite the crane because that information is on the core network and not accessing restricted memory blocks." Bixby nodded in confirmation. Trinian didn't say anything more for some time. Other thoughts ran through her mind that she dared not mention in Bixby's presence. Without knowing how deep Killian's access to Bixby was, she could not take the risk of letting him know her own intentions. The girl was determined to find out what his controls were and form her own strategies around them. Bixby informed Trinian, "Wormlings are abandoned by their mothers, and as long as no one interferes, they will survive to adulthood." The trivial fact meant to Trinian that she could have survived to adulthood if Killian hadn't influenced events. Was he fucking with Dad? And for how long? If the inside of Trinian's head were represented by a billboard of information, each tack would have multiple colored strings connecting other bits of information in an overly complex web of confusion. "You're right." She looked at the AI and thought to herself, "Killian and Faust divided my life amongst themselves. Why? Money? Genetic lottery? What about Bix? How do we collaborate if he can't say what he needs to, and I can't risk tipping off Killian?" She knew the answer, of course. Security. Trinian found it brilliant, but remembered that nothing was foolproof. There was a hole in Killian's security, and she was sure of it. It's just a matter of wiggling the arm around the mechanics until you find the exploit. She thought back to stealing her morning energy bars from a vending machine.